Hello, and welcome back to Zenin Fanfics. Today we're starting part 1 of an exciting new series. What if overpowered Deku became a prankster? If you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe for more content. The story we're featuring is written by Cooper Radio on archive of our own.org. You can find all the relevant links in the description, so be sure to check out the author's profile and say hello. Now let's dive into the story. So do I think you could become a hero without power? No, I do not. If the symbol of peace, can get injured to this extent, then what chance do you stand? It's good to dream, but make sure you're realistic about it. And if you still want to help people, then become a police officer or a paramedic. Sure, they get overshadowed by the heroes, but at least you will be able to do something in those jobs. And with that, the scraggly-looking blonde opened the door on the roof and left. But the green net he left behind barely noticed as he crumpled to the floor and started to cry. And he cried harder than he has ever cried before, because this wasn't happy, sad, or angry tears. No, they were the tears that fall from someone who just had their last shred of hope ripped out of them and crushed to dust. All the crying was causing his chest to constrict, and he might have been yelling, but he couldn't tell because all he could hear was what everyone has been trying to beat into him for years. Useless. Quirkless. Worthless. Deku. Why would you want a quirkless freak like you? Be realistic. Why don't you take a swan dive off the roof and hope for a quirk in your next life? And the thoughts just won't stop. His brain just keeps playing his worst memories over and over, and he just wants it to stop. You should probably give up, kid. Since you have the extra toe joint, the chances of you developing a quirk are basically zero. Izuku, I'm so sorry, so sorry. Just make it stop. By the time Izuku calmed down enough to take in his surroundings, he expected for it to be nearing sundown. But no, it was only about 2 hours since he had gotten out of school, and if he was guessing correctly, only about 50 minutes after All Might Crushed High left. 50 minutes since All Might left. So Izuku grabbed his stuff and walked down the stairs. It was completely silent, and no one even looked at him as he exited the building, but his mind was still too fizzled to care, so he just let his body run on automatic as he tried to clear his head. And it was working until he ran right into someone. He was quick to apologize, but it seems like the man didn't even notice, so Izuku finally looked up and observed his surroundings. There was a big crowd, and since he could see multiple heroes, it must be a villain fight. But why was it so quiet? He couldn't hear any fighting going on, so he pushed his way through the crowd, since none of them seemed to be reacting to his presence. And when he finally got to the front, he saw 2 people he really wished he hadn't. The sludge villain and Kakin. The sludge villain was currently trying to pry Kakin's mouth open, and Kakin was about to set an explosion off at his face. But both were just frozen there like action figures or something. Actually, now that Izuku looked at the crowd and the heroes, they were frozen as well. Was this the work of a quirk? But whose? And why is it affecting everyone but Izuku? Actually, none of that matters. Right now, Kakin is most likely drowning. Unless this quirk stops the need for air as well, but he has no way to prove that, so he rushes past the barrier made by Backdraft and throws his bag at the villains to hopefully make him slip up and allow Kakin the chance to escape, but a few seconds after it leaves his hand, it just pauses in midair. But Izuku doesn't have time to question it. He has to save Kakin. So he runs up to the villain and starts to tear through the sludge, but unlike the first time, the sludge actually gets ripped out by his hands, and so soon enough Kakin is free, but still not moving just like everything else. So he just grabs him by the arm and pulls him all the way over to the heroes, and despite his lack of muscle, it's surprisingly easily to drag him. Most likely because he's simply floating through the air as he pulls his arm, but he will take what he can get. After placing the arm that is about to explode away from the crowd, he turns back to the villain. Well, he can't just leave him like this, so Izuku hops in the air to grab his backpack from where it was floating, and after searching around, he finally found his water bottle that he barely uses but keeps just in case. And so after that, Izuku just started collecting the villain. He made sure to be very careful with the eyes as he shoved them in the bottle, but eventually he had most of the sludge in the bottle, and whatever was left was quickly thrown in one of the surrounding fires, since most likely he can just regrow what is lost, and if he can't, well, who is Izuku to care after almost dying because of this guy? And so he then sealed the bottle and learned from All Might's mistakes. He used some tape, also in his backpack in case he needed it, to seal the top securely. He grabbed one of his markers, yes, also from his backpack, and wrote, a live sludge villain do not drink, before placing it on the ground and walking back into the crowd. But then came a new problem. How does he get out of this? He really wants to make sure everything goes well, but he doesn't know how to make the world restart. And just like that, everything exploded at once. All the people he had bumped into or shoved suddenly felt all of it at once, causing most to stumble and a few to fall. Kakin set off his explosion, but all it did was send him into the arms of Death Arms. The bottle tipped over, and it was obvious that the villain was screaming. Whether it was pain or rage was impossible to tell, but at least he couldn't escape. But Izuku had it the worst, because all of his senses came rushing back to him at once, and God, it was so loud compared to the silence he was already getting used to. His eyes hurt like he had stared into the sun for too long, and his lungs were full of stale air. But there was one upside. His entire body felt like it was on fire, but in a good way. It was as if he had finally tapped into something that was bursting at the seams with power, and even though he only used it for a little bit, the strain in his head, he hadn't even realized was finally relaxing. After he blinked out the blurry spots in his vision and got some fresh air in his lungs, he finally looked up and looked at the scene. Most of the crowd had dissipated. Kakin was being checked over by a paramedic, and the heroes checked that the villain really was in the bottle. Later, when interviewed, all MT Lady would have to say is, "I don't know why I expected anything else." Soon it was just a few reporters, the police, some leftover civilians, and All Might in his deflated form staring directly at him. Wait, what was that last part? Izuku quickly locked eyes with the number one, and he seemed... Was that sadness? Or maybe guilt? Izuku couldn't tell, but he gave his best attempt at a glare when the hero took a step towards him, which was nowhere near successful with how flushed his face was from all the crying and screaming he did earlier. But it got the message across since he stopped, and after that Izuku just wiped the few tears his burning eyes let out before turning around and walking home. And it wasn't until he got home that he really thought about what he did. He was able to save Kakin and stop a villain with no one even realizing he was there. Technically, he did an act of vigilantism, but it's not like anyone can prove it, since the only evidence is a water bottle with fingerprints that aren't even in the system. But more importantly, he stopped time. Suffice to say, Izuku was kind of freaking out inside his room. So to calm down, he grabs a notebook that has been sitting on his shelf since he was 5. Quirk analysis for myself. Izuku Midoriya. He skips fast the pages all about telekinesis, fire breathing, and the possible pyromancy that could come from the two until he finds the first empty page, and then he just lets his mind drift through all his questions and theories. It makes so much sense that his eyes would burn and his lungs would feel stale. His eyes would have to find a way to see light photons without absorbing them so he doesn't go blind, and his lungs would have to be using air that is frozen in time, and while not noticeable at first, the second he switches back to the normal method, he would feel the difference. And seeing as how that's the only side effect, he must presume that there is another source. He's not tired or hungry, so it's not a stamina thing. He had time paused for about an hour, but he doesn't feel any mental strain over it. In fact, it feels like the opposite, as if there was a rock on his head for the past 10 years, and he finally chipped a piece of the weight off. Wait a minute, 10 years? Meaning he was 4. Most people get their quirks at 4, but maybe he couldn't use his, because it's a stockpiler, meaning when he was 4 he had nothing saved up, and so no one could tell if he paused time, because it would barely last a few minutes. But at some point, he must have forgotten the activation requirement, because everyone kept calling him Quirkless. But that still leaves the question of what he has been stockpiling all these years. After he wrote down all his theories, he hoped on his phone and searched up things about stockpiler quirks. Most of the results say stuff like mediation and focusing can make it easier to feel out the quirk, so that's what he was doing. Sitting on his bed crisscross applesauce with his eyes closed and trying to focus on the feeling of his quirk. After about 10 minutes, he was about to give up, but eventually he could feel his body absorbing something. No, wait, it couldn't be that simple, right? Quirk analysis for myself. Quirk. Time absorption. Description. A stockpiler quirk that automatically absorbs time itself. In its passive stage, it has no effect on the world. Think of it like a timer that ticks upwards forever. In its active mode, instead of the timer ticking up, it starts to tick down because the user is using up their save time to stop the time of the rest of the world, which allows the user to essentially stop time for everything that isn't him. And because of how long it took the user to discover their quirk, they have about 10 years saved up. meaning they could use this power for multiple years straight with basically no downsides besides maybe a major headache. Downsides. Eyes burn slightly because they have to use frozen photons to see in the frozen world. Lungs feel dry from having to use frozen oxygen. Possibility of other side effects that are just less noticeable until at a later date. Potential uses. Because only the user can move in the frozen world, there is no need to fight. All they need to do move the enemy's body enough to immobilize them. They could easily infiltrate any place they want with no one being the wiser, which is great for underground hero work. If an enemy can't be immobilized, user could potentially hit hard enough to make people think they have a strength enhancer, since if they punch something multiple times, the kinetic energy won't be able to go anywhere because time is paused, and once time is unpaused, all of those small hits will combine and be released at the same time, causing the strength behind the hits to multiply like crazy. Because this is a stockpiler, there is a chance that there is other ways to use it besides pausing time, and only pausing time for the user, but none have been discovered yet. And the other challenge requires another person, so nothing can be tested right now. Needs more testing. Okay, I think that's everything I know so far. So now I need to actually test it out, Izuku said before grabbing his phone and starting a timer. Okay, now just imagine it stopping, I guess. And he did, but nothing happened. How did I activate it last time? He said while walking in a circle, but then grimaced when he actually remembered how damn, I really hope there is another way to activate it besides devastation. Oh wait, I just need to do the opposite of the meditation thing. And with that thought, he went back to focusing on the feeling of his body absorbing time. Once he could feel it again, he just imagined pushing it out instead. And while it took him a second to actually get his body to listen, he eventually felt a click. 5:23. 5 minutes, that's way too long. But I guess it makes sense when you consider I've only used it once, and it wasn't even consciously, he said before grabbing his phone and pressing the reset button, and nothing happened. All right. Man, getting used to being able to pause time is going to take so long, but before he tried to unpause, he first tried to focus on just the phone. After a minute, it did unpause and reset, but just to make sure, Izuku ran to the front room, and sure enough, the timer on the stove was still frozen. Okay, so I can unpause certain objects and leave everything else frozen. That opens up the door to so many possibilities. Oh shoot, but now I'm going to have to manually fix the time on my phone anytime I do this. Wait, why am I complaining? I can literally pause time. And with that, he then spent the rest of the day trying out all types of theories or getting the activation time under 10 seconds. By the time the weekend came to an end, Izuku had developed a big understanding of his quirk. Pretty easy when you can literally spend a month in frozen time doing nothing but court practice. For one, he can unpause objects and people. Inko will never figure out why none of her clocks were working for like 30 seconds. So they can move in the frozen world, but he can't do anything in the normal world. Also, when he pauses time, his body is partially frozen, as well, seeing as how he once spent 24 hours doing nothing but experimenting, and not once did he feel tired, hungry, or anything else. And after he turned a normal Sunday into a month-long adventure, he's pretty sure he doesn't age either. But that's not to say he is immortal in pause time, because after he unpaused that 24 hours, he was much hungrier than when he went into pause. So while he doesn't need any of those things in pause time, he shouldn't neglect them entirely, or he will suffer when he goes back to normal time. But after he realized how much he can accomplish in just a day of normal time, he started a plan to prove everyone wrong, and that started with working out. You see, while he doesn't need to fight because of pause time, he might still need to carry people or rubble and stuff, and if he really needs to fight, then the stronger his punches, the less he will need to hit them in frozen time. And before you say anything about why he didn't try working out earlier, well, his mom can only afford so much, and even if they could afford a gym membership, most of them won't accept Quirkless. But now that no one can even see him, he can get a lot of 5-finger discounts at gyms. But he doesn't steal, because that would be unheroic. But over the Sunday he turned into a month, he has been going to the gym and using the equipment a lot. But after a month of working out, he decided to let the weekend actually end. And while he doesn't age in the pause time, he certainly put on some muscle, which is probably why everyone was staring at him at school. Because even though Izuku hasn't seen any of them in a month, they saw him last Friday, which makes the slight muscle he has gained very noticeable. DKU, the F happened to you? What, did you pay someone for some steroids or something? yelled Kakin the second he entered the room, but when he went to go slam his hand on Izuku's desk, so he couldn't ignore the question, he instead found his hands slamming down on his own desk. Kakin, should you really be here after getting attacked by a villain? Izuku asked while pulling out his notebook. So he's ready when class starts. Is it you trying to look down on me? Because I beat that villain before even the heroes could do anything. So don't any of you try to look down on me, when I'm the only one who has beaten a villain. Now this response was expected from Aldera's golden student, but was not expected was the response from Aldera's punching bag. Because he was laughing, actually Kakin had beaten a villain as well, so we're even, but now everyone was laughing and calling bullshit, but before Bakugo could give his own response, the teacher had arrived and told everyone to sit down. Izuku then paused time and stood up just to yell, "Why the hell did I say that?" Now everyone is just going to be more confused, or maybe they will lash out. Wait, should I tell anyone I have a quirk? Or should I just let them believe I'm still quirkless? God, why is this so confusing? He then looked at Kakin's frozen face and did something very stupid. Because he punched him. God damn it, that actually hurt. But it also had the intended effect. Thanks, Kakin, I feel so much better. And I know what I'm going to do now. After saying that, he sat back down in his chair, opened up his notebook to an empty page, and then let the feeling of time wash over him until the classroom exploded in a shouting when Kakin suddenly went tumbling out of his chair in a shout of pain and shock. But because Kakin is Kakin, he's not going to admit it felt like someone hit him really hard, so he just told everyone to shut up and got back in his chair. Like a repeat of Friday, Kakin waited until it was just him and Izuku in the class, so he could finally get his answers, but when he turned around to glare at Izuku, he was already walking out of the school gates. Man, I wish I discovered this before middle school started. I would have avoided so many injuries. Izuku then paused time again and walked home. He might be slightly paranoid about running into another villain, but he's not going to admit that to anyone, and especially not to himself. But as he was walking home, he actually did come across another villain. See, it's not paranoia if they're actually out to get you. He pointed both hands at the man holding a knife to a scared-looking woman's neck, as if anyone would be able to actually enjoy his joke, before he walked up and effortlessly took the knife from the man. After putting the knife in his backpack, just because he could, it's not stealing if you were taking something from someone who steals. He proceeded to tie the man up with a ripped hose he found in the trash, and only then did he unpause his time. "Oh my goodness, ma'am, are you okay?" By playing up the innocent act, he proceeded to help the woman calm down and eventually call the cops, at which point he went home knowing the woman would be fine. It took until he was about to open up the door to his house for him to realize that he just committed vigilantism. For the second time, he stared off into space for about a minute, just contemplating how many times he has illegally used his quirk simply because he's never had to worry about that law. But now that he has one, it's as if he is trying to make up for the past 14 years by using wherever it seems convenient. Izuku, please stop staring at the door, as if it holds all the secrets to the universe, and get inside, called his mom from the front room window before she shimmied back over to the kitchen. And while he did feel like he found something that held all the answers, it wasn't the door. Okay, seriously, sweetie, people are starting to stare. At that, he finally walked inside, and after exchanging pleasantries, he quietly walked off to his room and locked the door. He was probably burning a hole in the floor with all his walking back and forth, but he barely noticed as he was pulled deeper into his mumble storm. I mean, it makes sense. You take a kid who has never had to listen to a law because it doesn't apply to them and suddenly give them the properties that apply for the law, and they're going to subconsciously ignore the law as they explore that new part of themselves, and after they have gotten used to the new things, they would have basically forgotten that this law now works on them as well. And honestly, now that I think about it, why should I care? I have 14 years of enjoying a quirk to catch up on, and unlike if I had developed something flashy like explosions or pyromancy, this quirk is basically completely undetectable and can only hurt someone if I hit them with it over and over again, which I would never do. So yeah, it might be slightly illegal, but I plan to fully enjoy my quirk since I never got to as a child, and quite literally no one can stop me. Izuku then pulled off a slightly evil laugh before stopping and staring at the mirror he had set up in the corner of his room. Man, it's a good thing I'm not a villain or something. He then turned his head to stare at the city just outside his window, and he let a mischievous grin spread across his face as he said, "Actually, scratch that, I think I will become that, or something." Shoto Aizawa didn't know that the cold shiver he felt run up his spine as he stepped onto the roof of his building to start his patrol wasn't just a chilly wind hitting him. But he would later point it out as the moment he felt his problem child had just awakened as well, a problem child. That weekend he turned into a month was so he could figure out and master the basics. But as he tried to climb out the window and quickly realized he had zero parkour skills and ultimately had to pause time and walk out the front door, he gained a new plan alongside just having fun while saving lives. He now wanted to figure out the advanced stuff, and so he began his first patrol. It was very boring since he did it though the time paused, meaning he couldn't hear any criminals, and thanks to how still they are in the dark, he can't see them either. So he heads for a random part of town and unpauses. After he readjusted to normal time again, he started his patrol once again, and after about 10 minutes of walking he heard something. He immediately ran after the noise, which led him to an alleyway, where two drunkards had obviously got in a fight and forgotten all about the illegal quirk usage laws, twinning, or well, I guess tripleting in this case. But all it took was one simple time pause, and Dumb and Dumber were tied up and on opposite sides of the alleyway, so they could no longer argue. After that, he called the police, and just when the operator was about to pick up did he remember that he was doing something illegal and couldn't just talk in his normal voice. He panicked trying to come up with a plan, but the operator had already started talking, so as a last-ditch effort, he decided to raise the pitch of his voice and say hello. Yes. Thank you for picking up. I think two drunk guys were getting into a fight, B, but right as I was about to call you guys so you could break it up, B, before it got too bad, suddenly I blinked, and they were both tied up, and there was a tall and skinny man just standing there. But when I blinked again, he was just gone. And no, I couldn't recognize anything about the man. He was wearing all black and had a hood on. Yes, the two drunks are still tied up, and they don't seem injured. Am I? Oh yes, that's me, and sure I'll try to wait for the cops, but if I don't get home soon, then the ice cream I bought for tomorrow's party will melt, so I can't promise anything. I'd like to see you find time to go grocery shopping when your job takes up most of the hours in the day. I'm sorry that was a little snappy, but I'm getting kind of tired. He then hung up even as the officer asked for the lady's name. Wow, I think my improv skills have improved a lot. What do you two think? He turned to stare at the two drunks, but they were completely passed out after the adrenaline had left their system. Tough crowd. It seems he had a little chuckle before he teleported halfway back home to continue his patrol. When Eraserhead arrived on the scene, he expected that whoever took out these two had beat them both into unconscious, but neither of them had a single injury, and the only reason they were asleep was because they had tired themselves out while drunk. The lady who called it in was gone and didn't even give a name, but from her story, it doesn't seem like there was much more to add anyway. Two guys got drunk and got pissed at each other, but before they could fight or use their quirks, a third gentleman showed up, tied both men up, placed them on opposite sides of the alleyway, and disappeared all within a second and all without causing a single injury. A long sigh came from behind him, and when he turned around, he was met by Detective Sakachi entering the alley. Seeing as how they were both caught before they could actually do anything illegal, we can't arrest them, but they will both get a large warning about alcohol abuse and knowing when to quit so there isn't a second time. He stepped right up next to Eraserhead as he said, "Now look, I'm not the biggest fan of vigilantes." Eraserhead interjected with some dry sarcasm. "Really?" "I hadn't noticed," the detective chuckled and said, "but if this guy keeps up with the zero damage thing, I might have to make an exception." Eraserhead raised an eyebrow, but it wasn't judging, only genuine curiosity. "I want you to look me straight in the face and tell me that you could have stopped a fight between." He looked at a file he was holding. "Extendable dragon scales and brown bear transformation without either hurting yourself or the criminals." He looked up from the file to scan the empty alleyway and said, "But in comes this guy, and now we can't even put anything on these guys' files because of how cleanly they stopped the fight." Eraserhead nodded and said, "I'll admit their technique is clean, but seeing as how they are still doing it illegally, they will eventually mess something up. I'll catch them, and then hopefully we can set them on the right path to help people the legal way. And if not, they will at least get a short sentence with how clean they are with it." The detective sighed again and just said, "Yeah, hopefully." It would actually take about a month before any hero actually caught this guy in action, thanks to how quickly he can resolve just about anything. Hostage situation in the middle of the day? In a second, the hostage is free and the villain is detained without anyone catching sight of who did it. Mugging? The criminal has all their weapons taken away and tied up while the victim doesn't have a scratch on them. Deal? Everyone involved is tied up while the actual medicines are safely placed out of sight of all the criminals. I think you get the gist. They're always tied up and completely detained without anyone catching sight of the vigilante besides just a simple description of wearing all black. It's actually why people started calling the vigilante ghost or yokai. But it seems like such a good track record has actually made them cocky, and they started experimenting with what they can get away with. It started out simple. Instead of just tying them up, they would write a note and leave it at the scene for the police or heroes to see, and what was written could be anything from in-depth analysis on the criminals to just saying a joke / stating a fun fact related to the crime. But about 2 weeks after starting that, they got bored, and now every now and then there would be a note with a hint to where the vigilante was right now. Sometimes the police could figure it out in time and catch a glimpse of the illegal hero running across the rooftops before they disappeared a few seconds later. But even if they couldn't, there would still be another note with encouragement to try harder next time. But as he was saying earlier today, a hero almost caught the vigilante. And it was all because they decided to step their game up once again. So as it turns out, being an all-powerful time god gets boring quickly. Now don't get Izuku wrong, he loves that he is saving people with no casualties, and he isn't about to start fighting criminals just for the fun of it. But who says that he can't have some fun with the aftermath? And so he tried to get some of his excitement out by writing stuff down and just slapping it to the criminal's head for the police to enjoy. He stayed close by to a couple of the scenes just so he could hear them enjoying his jokes and fun facts. But that eventually got boring as well, and he was running out of jokes and fun facts related to these simple crimes. So instead, he started writing riddles that gave funny answers or would point the police to the next area of his patrol, so they could maybe catch him, but the police took a lot longer to solve them than Batman ever did, and that got boring as well. He still left notes encouraging them to improve since he didn't want them to feel bad. And so, currently, he was sitting on a roof. Ever since he started the vigilante gig, he has been learning about parkour, just so he could run and sit on roofs, reading one of the Batman comics on his phone to give himself ideas. Police are bad at complicated riddles, so I can't effectively pull off any really funny pranks unless I decide to hide some all over the town to make them believe I'm up to something terrible only to reveal something harmless, meaning I can't really steal any ideas from Riddler unless I want to try pranking Nizu or something. There was a non-committed hum behind him, but he was too lost inside his own mind to notice. While the satanic rat would enjoy the riddles, he wouldn't be affected by the pranks because he has a one-track mind like that, which therefore means it wouldn't be funny for the person pranking him. Izuku agreed as he looked at some of the other villains and vigilantes, so he could get an idea for what would be funny to pull off in the real world. Joker and Harley are insane, and so most of their pranks involve hostages, and while I'm looking for something to cure boredom while saving lives, I still want to save lives, so they're out. Scarecrow's fear toxin has a lot of potential for hilarious pranks, but I'm not a chemist, so he is out as well. There was a huff, but Izuku couldn't tell if it was annoyance or humor. Wait, you've been handing out notes and riddles because you are bored, while illegally breaking the law and saving people? Izuku agreed again, while scrolling down to a picture of Mr. Freeze. Well, unless my enemy is untouchable for whatever reason, or is too strong to contain for long periods of time, I'm basically unbeatable. But after you never get challenged in a fight for multiple months straight, you end up craving one. But I don't want to endanger anybody, meaning I can't change my fighting style. He flicked past Mr. Freeze and Bane, but stopped on a picture of Clayface halfway, transformed into Batman. But if I can bring some harmless / minor inconvenience fun into how I do things after the fight, then no one gets hurt, and I still get to challenge myself. Izuku was slowly coming out of his mutter storm, and only now, realizing that someone has been over his shoulder almost the entire time. And it seems that whoever was behind him noticed this change as well, because Izuku could hear their feet shift as they stood back up, but Izuku was faster. Once he was sure time was paused, he put his phone into his pocket and slipped his cheap dollar store goggles back over his eyes until it was flesh with the black face mask he had on. He then stood up and turned to look at his adversary, only to be met with the piercing eyes of Eraserhead. Luckily, it wasn't literally piercing, or his quirk wouldn't have activated. So after fanboying a little bit, he quickly dug his phone back out to take a selfie with his favorite underground hero, but when he looked at the still frozen image of Clayface wearing half the face of Batman, he got an even better idea. He still took a few photos with the frozen hero, but after that he slipped the golden goggles off his neck and placed them on his own face. They immediately fell off, but after readjusting them, they fitted perfectly, and just to add to the joke, he took his own cheap goggles, and after making the strap a lot longer, he placed them around the man's head, until they were firmly placed atop his wavy black hair. Imagine Eraserhead, but just having obnoxious green swimming goggles tugging at his hair. He definitely spent way too long laughing at his first real prank, but he was perfectly fine with it, seeing as how pulling these pranks were literally just to help with his own boredom. But eventually Izuku walked behind the man, and while still wearing the goggles over his eyes, he unpaused and watched as Eraserhead's eyes flashed red, and he threw his scarf at nothing. So as I was explaining, I'm literally suffering from success, but can't afford to do anything less, he said while adjusting the goggles again, so they fit better. Eraserhead basically growled as he demanded for his hero gear to be returned, but Izuku simply chuckled as he explained how he gave him a replacement. Now Izuku was full on belly laughing as he watched such an esteemed hero rip the swimming goggles off his head and proceeded to stomp them into nothing. Oh, come on, I thought they looked kinda cute on you. Eraserhead grabbed him with a capture scarf and pulled him into his fist, which connected thanks to Izuku being caught by his quirk, but the second he blinked, Izuku was standing on the next roof over rubbing his cheek. Geez man, if you get this upset about being called cute, then I think I'm going to reconsider my idea of starting up a social media profile to show off all my awesome pics. As Eraserhead jumped the gap and was about to activate his quirk, Izuku simply just walked back over to the original roof and continued talking. Actually, scratch that, I'm still going to do it. I just think I'll keep the underground hero ones to myself. Eraserhead was ticked off at not being able to keep up with the teleporter or speedster or whatever they are, but he didn't show any of it as he asked a question, since it was obvious that fighting would take too long. From the way you talk about it, this sounds like a recent development. So how come you could enjoy fights earlier, but are apparently too strong now? Izuku rolled his eyes. Eraserhead couldn't see, since the whole purpose of those goggles was to hide where his eyes were looking. Before saying, I'm not making it that easy to find me, because then it wouldn't be fun, but I will give you a hint. He teleported behind Eraserhead and said the thing about stockpiling quirks is that usually their only downside is running out of whatever they stockpile. He then teleported in front of Eraserhead before the man had a chance to try to turn around. But if your only weakness is running out of whatever you stockpile, then how powerful do you think someone would be if they had a near infinite supply that replenishes faster than you can deplete it? After teleporting back to the original roof, he said, well, then they'd probably find themselves with enough power to best all might, which means low-level thugs and villains stand no chance, and leave you with a lot of free time to annoy people. He rubbed his still sore cheek as he turned away from Eraserhead. But like I said, that's low-level, guys, and thanks to you I realized two things. Eraserhead tried to wrap up the teleporter even as they monologued through it all, but was unsuccessful every time. So he just said, oh yeah? And what are those? But Izuku continued to stay out of his grasp as he said, well, for one, I should be trying to find and defeat bigger villains, seeing as how the first time I've been actually heard as a vigilante was because I pissed off the Eraserhead, meaning bigger villains might be more creative like you, but I can also prank them way harder, because they are actual villains. After saying that, Eraserhead lost sight of the vigilante for multiple seconds, but when he asked what the second thing was, a voice called out from multiple roofs over, the second thing is that my costume sucks ass. And only after saying that did Eraserhead realize that he never got his goggles back, and that he potentially just gave the kid with an almost unlimited stockpile quirk the idea to, hey, fight worse villains because they must be more challenging. But most likely the worst one be, he gave him the idea for a new prank to satiate his boredom, and all he could do was sigh and prepare for the future. The first time it happened was a week after Shoto had officially met Ghost. He had already filled all the new information he had on the vigilante at the police station, and had even got his goggles replaced. Actual replacements and not cheap and terrible swim goggles. But as he was finishing up some papers in the teacher lounge at UA, suddenly the loud blonde that calls itself his best friend bursts into the lounge on the verge of either crying or laughing. It's a lot harder to tell the difference with him than you would think. Guys, I just got robbed. Even with Shoto canceling his quirk, he finds a way to be loud. But his shout did catch the attention of all the teachers in the room, which was basically all of them except Cementos, Lunch Rush, Nedzu, and Vlad King. Immediately, there were shouts of concern and people asking for the story, but Shoto was still intently staring at the limelight hero. Nothing looks missing, so maybe he was wrong about Ghost picking up a new habit. He still had his directional speakers. He still had his iconic glasses. He still had his headphones that double as hearing aids. He still had way too much leather on. Even his socks kind of look like leather. Wait a minute. Why the hell are you walking around with no shoes? It seems like Nemuri beat him to the realization. But Hizashi just bursted out laughing. That's the thing. 1 second I'm talking to this little listener who had a great cosplay of you. Shoyuta already knew where this was going. And so, he simply just slumped into his chair until his forehead hit the desk. So anyways, I'm doing my patrol, and the little cosplayer shows up and asks for an autograph. Obviously, as the beloved hero, I signed some stuff with my face on it, and even this cute little hand-drawn picture of me in a notebook. He stops talking as if trying to collect the story in his head. Next thing I know, I feel about 4 inches shorter, and when I look down, wouldn't you know it, my boots are gone. He laughs again as he stares down at his shoeless feet. 13 is the one who speaks up this time. If that's the case, then why do you seem so happy? Hizashi finally moved from in front of the door to grab a shoe box from under his own desk. Well, those boots were starting to get worn down and would probably only last another month before they became no longer combat worthy. So I had already had a backup pair set up. He said this while pulling the second boot on and walking around a little while the boots made loud clacking noises from the new soles. After that, he sat down and said, but the reason I'm laughing is because the little listener who wanted my autograph is the one who stole them, and if the way he stumbled down the street was anything to go by, he had never worn any shoes with raised soles. He immediately started bursting out laughing at the mental image. He was probably put up to it by a friend as a dare, but seeing the kid try to run in the boots made it all worth it. After hearing the explanation, he knew beyond a doubt who did this. So he sighed and finally sat up to stare Hizashi down. That wasn't a kid trying to succeed at a dare. That was a vigilante trying to prank you by stealing a part of your costume. Everyone was silent for a long time before Hizashi started laughing even harder. Wait, so does that mean I actually watched a trained vigilante who fights crime on the regular, asked for my autograph just so he could steal my boots and stumble down the street in them as he tried to run from me? Everyone was chuckling after that, until Ectoplasm asked if that was why he wasn't wearing his goggles last Friday. It was dead silent as everyone let it sink in that a child successfully stole something from Eraserhead, and he hadn't been able to catch them. Or well, it was silent until Hizashi got done with processing that information. You got robbed by a child. Ha 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 ha, cough. Show, please, it wasn't actually that funny, I'm sorry. So please stop choking me with the scarf. Eraserhead was running through his patrol like normal until suddenly Ghost was stumbling next to him while laughing. It was so worth taking the boots I knew he was going to throw away soon after he said that Shoyuta actually looked down at his feet, and where the boots ended halfway up Hizashi's leg, the boots on the vigilante were almost drowning the knees in fabric. So why did you take them anyways? He asked while sending the scarf at Ghost, since his whole mission was to try and catch him. Ghost stumbled and actually fell before teleporting to the next rooftop. Originally, I just took them because my running shoes were falling apart, but they also make everything so much funnier. He once again stumbled, but he seemed to be getting better at adjusting to the new center of gravity. Once Shoyuta was on the same roof as the vigilante, he could actually tell that he definitely gained a good few inches, and if he had a lower pitch voice, he might actually believe that this wasn't a young teen. So, is that your master plan? He asked mockingly as he once again tried to attack Ghost. But instead of teleporting, he was halfway successful at running and jumping to the next roof while avoiding his kick. Kinda? He yelled before running away from the underground hero by jumping and teleporting from one roof to the next. Eraserhead gave chase, but tried to stay away from using his scarf, since either he teleports out of the way and he has to pull the scarf back to him, or he catches him, but the second he blinks the scarf is empty and he has to catch back up to him. After teleporting on top of a small water tower, he stopped running to say, I don't really have a reason for becoming a vigilante besides being petty and wanting to help people. So as you can see, my first costume was made solely from cheap things that were kinda bad at hiding my identity. Eraserhead used the scarf to get atop the water tower, but the kid had already teleported to the next roof and was continuing his story. So anyways, I took your goggles to hide my eyes better, and then present mixed platform boots to hide my height. After that, he did a little spin, but now that I'm wearing them, I kind of like the extra height. He mumbled something about buying his own pair, but Shoyuta could barely hear anything beyond that. As Eraserhead's eyes flashed red, he jumped down and landed on top of them. He immediately set to putting cuffs on the Vigilante, but something that felt like a block of metal hit his back and caused him to blink. He cursed as he searched for the kid, but it was obvious that they ran away after that close encounter. He was about to call in the sighting and get back to his patrol when he felt something sticking to his back. It was a sticky note that said, "Turns out I also like having a fancy block of metal stuck to the bottom of my shoes. Give my thanks to PM for my escape this night." PM was obviously present Mike, and for the first time Shoto hates that Hisashi wears combat-made boots. And now that he thinks about it, he still didn't get his original goggles back. The third victim was Snipe, and no, he wasn't missing any guns. But when one day, he walked into the teacher lounge wearing a black version of his usual red cape, everyone was confused, including Nizu, who was actually here this time around. But Hisashi just started laughing again. The little cosplayer strikes again. Almost everyone was laughing now, but it seemed like Namiri was laughing the hardest. "Isn't that the backup cape you try to dye green for St. Patrick's Day?" Snipe just sighed and said, "I didn't bleach it first, so the red and green mixed and became a ugly brown." He grabbed a piece of the cloak that had a little bit of forest green shining through and said, "I then tried to dye it black, but I still didn't bleach it, so now there are little patches of green and brown." "And the reason why you are wearing it today?" That question came from Nizu, who had been silently observing this entire interaction. If the way he dipped his head a little, it must be embarrassing. Which is precisely why Hisashi and Namiri started egging him on for details. "All right, fine. Last night I was on a mission. It was a simple medicine bust, and they wanted someone with range to be on the team, so I was set up on the adjacent roof and was taking down criminals left and right until suddenly someone is tapping on my shoulder. I turn around, getting ready for a fight, only to be met with open air. But when I turned back around to face the building, there was just some guy standing in front of me, and he starts fuck watch your language. He starts monologuing like some cartoon villain. He goes on about how he loves my costume, but that it clashes too much with his own vibe, or whatever. From the way he is talking, I'm guessing he was a villain, so I shoot him with one of the non-piercing rounds, but he just straight up teleports behind me, and for whatever reason my quirk can't lock onto him, so the bullets just fly like normal bullets. But here's the annoying part. He takes my hat just to throw it back at me, but when I go to catch it, suddenly all my buttons are clicked off, and he just rips my cloak off and starts bragging about how the cloak will go much better with his hoodie look. And he has the gall to insult the red color of it. With that, he finishes his rant and starts walking into the room while saying something along the lines of, "Those brightest goggles don't match the rest of your outfit either, but I don't see you insulting those." He was about to sit at his desk, but was stopped by Hisashi. "Okay, but I got to know." He paused as if to add drama before saying, "Did he look fabulous in my boots?" It only took 3 days before Eraserhead saw the Vigilante again, and it was only because they had both apparently decided to bust a gang called the Watchdogs. Eraserhead was in the middle of erasing the quirk of a man who could shoot red-hot lasers out of his eyes when suddenly the man fell face first and was tied up and knocked out. "Hey, Eraser, do you know any places that sell dyes that would be strong enough to dye a fire and slashing-resistant cloak?" Shoto still had adrenaline going through him, so when someone had snuck up behind him and started talking, he just reacted. He spun around and sent a roundhouse kick in the direction of the voice, but when he hit nothing, he stopped and took a few deep breaths while observing his surroundings. And once he had calmed down, he took a second to remember what the voice said and quickly put the pieces together. The Vigilante was back and was asking for dye advice. But by this point, the adrenaline had left his system, and he was 90% sure Ghost, wherever he was, wouldn't attack him, so he went around and made sure that all the criminals were safely contained. So when everything was double-checked, and he had called in everything that happened, including the unwanted help of a prankster ghost, he finally gave a response. Not even Snipe knows that answer, seeing as how the closest he got was an amalgamation of green, brown, and black. And while he doesn't crack jokes often, he didn't expect the stunned silence he got in return. When he finally turned to look at the now mostly red, yellow, and black Vigilante, Ghost started picking at the red cloak and simply said, "Really? How interesting," before disappearing for about 30 seconds. In that time, Shoto had left the building and got on top of it to wait for the police when he heard a voice call out from behind him again, Honestly, this fits my vibe of being a mismatched jester way better anyways. And yep, as he turns around, he finds Ghost now donning the ugly mismatched cloak that Snipe has been wearing for the past few days. And while he doesn't want to agree with the illegal hero damn, was he right about it looking better on him than it ever would on Snipe. He did a little spin to show off his new piece of gear before looking at Eraserhead and saying, "Okay, look, before you try to attack me for stealing from the same hero twice, you should know I returned the red one in almost perfect condition." Eraserhead raised an eyebrow at the almost part, but he either didn't see it or ignored it as he started walking over to the air conditioner and sat down on it. Eraserhead contemplated trying to capture him again, but it seems like it would be almost impossible unless he had multiple people and snuck up on him. But seeing as how Ghost keeps finding him while he is alone, he doesn't see an actual capture happening unless they get more info. Speaking of which, why do you always track down the one guy who actually has a shot at beating your instantaneous teleportation? The Vigilante either wasn't expecting that question or wasn't expecting a conversation at all, but after a little bit of stumbling he said, "Well, it's like technically my only way of getting stronger. Like I said, I don't want to endanger innocence by not using my quirk in a fight, but I don't have that problem if I'm just using it for the bare minimum against you. Meaning I get stronger at evading without my quirk, which will therefore also make what I can do with my quirk better. It's like a win-win situation for everybody, but you wait, no, it's a win-win-win situation for everybody, but you, because talking and fighting you is a lot more fun than anything else I've done." Show you decide at how childish they were acting before asking their next question. Okay, that explains why you purposely run up to and then away from heroes, but that still doesn't explain why you try to find me every single time. Their answer came a lot more quick this time. "Well, for one, the whole training thing I'm doing becomes even more effective if there are actual stakes like with your quirk. But also I'm kind of lonely, and all the other heroes are either too hard to talk to or are too serious." Now, while he would never admit it, Shoyuta felt kind of insulted. But before he could say anything about it, Ghost started sputtering before saying, "Wait, no. That's not what I meant. You were serious about saving people and doing things efficiently. The guys I'm talking about are too serious about their jobs. Like Snipe wouldn't even say one word to me until I threw his hat. And Endeavor despises vigilantes, but I think he especially hates me for that one time I stopped a convenience store robbery in the middle of the afternoon, but disappeared before he could even try to chase me down, and damn, that was a lot of information to absorb, but he thinks he understands the main part. So a lonely, uncatchable teenager can't find any friends closer to his own age besides a hobo-looking underground hero that doesn't completely hate vigilantes." They simply nodded once and laid down against the air conditioner while lightly kicking their feet before stopping to say, "Well, I guess I could go hang out with Present Mike, seeing as how he seemed to be the only one that enjoyed my prank." But then we get to the opposite problem. People like Present Mike or Midnight are too loud and draw attention, and as you said yourself, I'm uncatchable, which would just look bad for everyone. Really? The vigilante who loves to prank heroes and villains alike doesn't want anyone to see. Ghost then sat up and scoffed, "I prank heroes and villains so my life isn't boring. I couldn't care less if other people find my humor funny." Okay, well, I do find it a little funny if the people I'm pranking also enjoy the jokes, but for the most part it's all for my own sakes. Shoyuta just rolled his eyes as he turned back around when he heard the police sirens approaching. "Whatever you say, Ghost." He missed the "holy shit, I have a vigilante name" since it was done in pause time, but he still got a feeling that was the first he had actually heard what people were calling him, if the stunned silence was anything to go by. Oh wait, no. He just teleported away when he heard the sirens. You see, this is how you end up with a name like Ghost, by literally ghosting people instead of saying goodbye. And I still forgot to get my goggles back. As expected, the next day, Snipe busted in the lounge and basically yelled, "That bastard returned my red cloak." But this information didn't seem to bring him any joy. And they found out why when Vlad King walked into the door behind the seething cowboy and just stopped and stared at his back. "Snipe Senpai, why did you bedazzle your cape things?" Once he heard the voice, he turned around to say something to Vlad, but stopped when he realized his back was now to the rest of the staff. And they could all see the shiny green gems that made up a cute bunny on the back. And because Shoyuta was busy trying to hide his own creeping smile, he wasn't fast enough to look at Hizashi and stop his quite literal explosive laughter. None of the students would learn why half the windows in the building needed to be replaced. Nor would they learn why afterwards Snipe Sensei refused to turn his back to any of them for the next 2 days. Izuku's Vigilante career only really kicked off after he stole Eraserhead's goggles. Because after that, Izuku stopped just going through alleys and looking for small-time guys. He still did it because what kind of hero would he be if he started ignoring the small stuff? But after that fight, he started going through the worst-looking areas both in real and pause time. And thanks to that, sometimes he would stop a deal or end a gang war. But about a week later, he noticed that the black running shoes he bought specifically for this were starting to wear and tear and making it really uncomfortable to run. Well, he got these awesome goggles from a hero, so maybe another one will have some good replacement options for shoes. Wait, is it morally okay to steal shoes? Like Eraserhead doesn't use his goggles in every fight, so he will be okay, but what hero doesn't need shoes? 13 has had multiple shoe designs, but who's to say they keep all of them on hand? Hawks can fly, but that could also make it hard to prank him by stealing them. Izuku palmed his fist into the other hand as he figured out the perfect hero. Oh, right. Present mixed shoes always look cleaner after about 5 months, but I bet he probably buys them about a month in advance, meaning if I do the prank right at the end of his patrol in Hosu, then there will basically be no downsides. He was getting excited about messing with another hero, but flinched when one of the guys wearing a bird mask that he tied up yelled, "Why the F have you been mumbling about shoes for the last 3 minutes? Do you have some kind of foot fetish?" Now Izuku was astonished and a little disgusted, so he turned to look at the downed criminal and said, "I'll have you know that my shoes are starting to break down from fighting guys like you, so I'm mumbling about shoes because I need to replace mine soon." He then sent a kick into the man's head and waited until he passed out to pause time and walk home. He woke up that Saturday feeling both tired from how long he stayed out, but also energized from how excited he feels about not only tracking down and meeting Present Mike, but also how funny it will be to steal his shoes. As he walked into the kitchen to make some cereal, his mother either didn't notice his contradictory mood or was simply not bringing it up. After eating breakfast, he watched a little bit of Vampire Diaries with his mom since she wanted to do something together. They watch it in dub, even though everybody says it's better in sub. But they only got through like half an episode before she needed to head to work, which left Izuku alone for a couple of hours. After setting an alarm for 10 o'clock, he made his way to the beach and started to clean it up some more. He stopped trying to clean the beach in pause time since he found out it's a good way to actually pass the time, something kind of difficult to do when your whole power is about stopping time. But eventually his alarm went off, and he made his way home, showered, and put on the Vigilante gear he keeps stuffed in the corner of his closet. Well, he says Vigilante gear, but it's really just a black jacket with a hood, some black gloves, and black cargo pants. The only real gear is the yellow goggles. But today he would also be wearing something else yellow. His backpack, which he stuffed with some Present Mike merch, and his analysis notebook number 11, which just so happens to hold the one all about Present Mike. After all of that, he put on his falling apart black running shoes and a few markers and pens before pausing time and making his way to Hosu, but more specifically where Present Mike ends his patrol of that place on Saturdays. When he got off the subway he took for free, he didn't want to do it, but he also didn't want to have to lie to his mom about why his subway card paying for a ride to Hosu. He walked around the city for a while until he saw the giant slicked-up hair of one Presentation Michael, and just as Izuku had predicted, he was currently walking towards his car to go home. So Izuku slipped his mask and goggles on and ran over while bringing out some of the things he wanted signed. "Oh my gosh, it's Present Mike. I love your radio show, and if you're not busy, could you sign this?" He definitely looked surprised at being found right before he left, but quickly put his hero persona on while saying, "Well, little listener, I usually don't like when people interrupt my patrol, but seeing as how mine is basically over and I'm very interested in your cosplay, sure." After saying that, he immediately set to signing some posters and was even very careful to sign his name while not obscuring the drawing or notes in his notebook, unlike a certain number one who used up 2 whole pages with a marker that bleeds through. He seemed so genuine in his excitement over what he thought was a Eraserhead cosplayer wanting an autograph that Izuku was second-guessing about pranking him. He shook his head and decided to compromise. "I'm Present Mike, sir?" He immediately had the undivided attention of the hero, but it was feeling way too similar to how it was with All Might, and he almost asked that question again out of instinct. But he stopped himself by looking down at the ground and instead said, "I was kind of dared into pranking you, but I dash." He was cut off as Present Mike interrupted with, "Do it." Now that confused him greatly, and so he whipped his head up with wide eyes at the hero. Not that he could see the wide eyes, since once again that was the whole point of the goggles. But what he saw instead was a hero that was absolutely buzzing with excitement. I said do it. I haven't been pranked ever since Oboro D, ever since my old friend left, so little cosplayer, I triple dog dare yo as yo, but to prank the number 38 hero presentational mic. And if you don't make me laugh, I will track you down and prank you just as hard. And despite how much he was bouncing with excitement, Izuku could tell that he was serious about getting revenge, so he immediately set to work. Okay, you've been warned. He immediately pointed a finger upwards, and Mike fell for it perfectly as he looked up, probably thinking he was going to dump something on him, but nope, instead he paused time and immediately swapped their shoes. Well, he says swapped, but it's more like place his runners on top of his sock-covered feet, since they would never actually fit on him. But now he had a new problem. You see, he chose Present Mike because he knew they were going to replace their combat boots soon. But he forgot one specific thing. Present Mike wears 4-inch platform boots with metallic soles. Meaning when Izuku, the 14-year-old, put them on, those boots were almost reaching his knees, and he was suddenly 5'9". Safe to say his center of gravity was all messed up, and he was finding it a little difficult to walk straight. After putting them on and standing up straight, he could just about meet the man's chin with the top of his head. He stumbled around for a little as he took some selfies with the hero. He was definitely going to start up a Vigilante social media account now, because he could already see that his photography skills were improving. But all that stumbling is probably why he accidentally unpaused time and got to watch as the hero slowly realized and looked down at their feet before staring directly at him and yelling a quick hey. But it scared Izuku into moving, and he quickly started stumbling/running away from the hero, who half-heartedly ran after him. But the more he stumbled in the boots, the more Present Mike laughed, and so therefore the worse he could run after him. And after about a minute, he lost sight of the hero, and all he could hear was him laughing about how funny he looked trying to run away. And all Izuku could do was agree and laugh as well, because he seriously felt ridiculous while trying to run. After wearing the boots for a few days, he was getting a lot better at walking around in them. He still stumbled while running, but it was still leagues better than when he tried to run from Present Mike. He also fought Eraserhead again and spat this whole lie about actually planning what he did, and while it definitely was true, it was not the reason why he did any of that. He took the goggles because Eraserhead became his new #1 favorite after all might try to crush his dreams. He took the boots because they looked like they wouldn't fall apart so easily, and Present Mike has always been in his top 10 favorite heroes. He didn't even think about the whole height thing until after he had taken the boots. But after he said it to Eraserhead, he really started to think about it, and realized there was something he has wanted for a long time, but gave up on ever having, since it would just get in the way if he didn't have a pyromancy quirk to keep people away. But now that he has a quirk that makes it impossible for almost anyone to catch him, he is going to get it. That's right, he is going to get a bike escape, and he is going to look fabulous in it. Izuku then put all the criminals he caught in circle and unpaused time. There were screams of anger and terror at being suddenly moved and detained, but Izuku ignored it as he stayed around to make sure he tied all of them well enough that they won't escape. Anyways, as I was saying, I want to get a cape, and I want it to be hero-level materials in case I need to run though a fire or wrap it around scared children. But which hero's cape would work best with my look? He mumbled all this while readjusting some of rope. I bet All Might keeps his bronze costume somewhere in my tower, but that man is a 7-foot giant, and I don't think I even have anything strong enough to cut up a David Shield-level cape to fit my proportions. Slide in. Go also has a cape, but that guy is basically a walking ad for the commission, so it wouldn't even be funny to take his. Ectoplasm has the coat thing going for him, but then I would have to cut armholes and dye it black, and would the dye even stick to such a thick fabric? But man, I'm also kind of running out of snipe, yelled one of the criminals, and Izuku immediately started looking around for the gun-slinging hero, but when he didn't see anything, he looked at the criminal with a raised eyebrow. The guy looked plain if you ignored his slightly glowing orange hair and eyes, but once he had the attention of every single person who broke one law or another, he shook his head and said, "No, not the actual hero, but his cape. I thought it was a cloak." "Idiot, it's obviously a cowl." They all started to argue, but the orange-haired one shut them up by saying, "All of you shut up. It's a cloak with a button-up cowl instead of a hood, but it also looks a lot like a cape, only probably a lot easier to dye." All of this arguing was caused by Izuku's mumbling habit, and him being childish about wanting a cape, which caused him to burst out laughing. Man, I didn't realize a bunch of house robbers had this much to say about fashion, but thanks for the ideas. I'll definitely have to think about pranking Snipe now. He pretended to wipe away a tear before walking up to the orange-haired man and shaking his tied-up hand. I'll always remember the random four-man crew I met that decided to help me with my fashion problems. Now, they were all arguing again, because they remembered that they were criminals, and he was a vigilante, but the moment was nice while it lasted. So, as it turns out, it's a lot harder to find the gunslinger than Eraserhead or Present Mike ever was. Eraserhead, at least on Sundays, patrols near his house, so it's easy to catch up with him on those days. Present Mike patrols a lot of places, but it's always easy to spot him. But wherever Snipe is, it's far away from him, and therefore very hard to find. But hearing some things through the grapevine, he found the mission Snipe was on tonight, meaning it was easy to show up right after all the fighting was done and tap him on the shoulder. The hero whipped around and tried to hit him, but he just teleported to be in front of him when he eventually turned back around. And when he did that, he started asking about his costume. So, Mr. Cowboy, does your cape cloak thing come in multiple colors? He pointed at the item of clothing before saying, "Don't get me wrong, I love the red on you. It fits your whole vibe incredibly well," but he picked up the corners of his jacket while saying, "You see, so far I have stuck to black, green, and yellow. So, would you just happen to have one?" Snipe stayed silent for a minute before fast drawing his gun and firing off 3 bullets. Izuku paused time just before any of them hit him and immediately screamed, "Oh my god, they're just bruising rounds, not piercing." He took deep breaths before saying, "I thought I was about to die." He sent a dark look at the hero, but he obviously couldn't see it since he was paused. After he regained his composure, he smacked all 3 bullets with a pole to mess with Snipe's quirk before walking behind him and unclicking all the buttons on the cape thing. After that, he took his hat as revenge. He unpaused time and said, "I was trying to talk fashion, man, but if you want to just fight, then I'll just do this." Behind the mask, Snipe's eyes went wide as he watched the vigilante throw the hat like a frisbee near the edge of the roof. And the second Snipe extended his hands to grab the hat, he ran up and yanked the cloak off and immediately set to clicking it around his own neck. "Well, would you look at that, I was right. The cloak goes perfectly with the hood." He grabbed the edges of the cloak that only just avoided the floor before sighing, "But I was also right about how the red does not look good on me." He looked up at the hero who was getting ready to try to shoot him again, so he teleported just out of his sight and said, "If you had just told me whether or not you had this cloak in any other colors, this could have been a much more fun conversion." And finally Snipe said something, "I'm not giving anything to your thieving ass." So Izuku left him high and dry by teleporting to a convenience store and bought a bunch of fake green gems so he could fix the color scheme problem until he found an appropriate dye. Right as he was about to buy the gems, yes, in full costume minus the mask, he was stopped by a gun being extended over his shoulder. Internally, Izuku was freaking out, thinking that Snipe somehow found where he was and caught up to him, but then noticed that this gun wasn't a revolver, so flicked his new cape upwards to cover everyone's vision before pausing time and letting the cape fall back around his figure. He did a little fist pump while saying how cool that was before looking at his surroundings. 2 guys with guns, and 1 guy with a rock manipulation quirk outside, trying to fight Endeavor. Wait, hey, minute. What the hell is Endeavor doing in such a low crime level area? Plus, I thought he only stopped big stuff since his fire is too strong for smaller things. He then actually looked at Endeavor and saw what he was about to do to the rock guy. Well, I was right about being too strong for smaller things, but it seems like he doesn't care as long as he beats the bad guys. Izuku immediately set to disarming the 2 men and placing the guns on the counter before using a jump rope he found in the toy section to tie both of them together. After that, he headed outside and did the same to the rock guy, but slammed his fist in the head, seeing as how it doesn't look like he needs his hands to use his quirk. And finally, he turned to look at the Hellflame hero, and after using all his might, he managed to turn the giant of a man to face the mostly empty street, so he wouldn't break all the windows at the convenience store. And then he unpaused. The 2 men inside screamed in anger at being tied up, and the store clerk screamed when they saw the 2 guns suddenly appear in front of them. Finally, the rock guy screamed in pain as all the rocks he was controlling fell to the ground, and Endeavor screamed the name of one of his lower scale moves. "Man, that's a lot of yelling, but I paid for what I came here for, and so I'm out." Just before he paused time again, he heard Endeavor yell some profanity at the idea of vigilantes altogether, but disappeared before he could hear the rest. So apparently Snipe lied about having a cloak in multiple colors. And he just had to learn this information after he spent 3 hours making an intricate-looking bunny out of the gems he bought. A waste of money and a waste of time. Huh, I wasted time. That's funny. He clapped a frozen Eraserhead on the shoulder in a way of saying thanks before running over to where he thinks Snipe was taking care of a huge villain breakout at a prison. Once he was there, he walked around the place, avoiding the 10-foot elephant mutant guy, but placing some stuff in his way to hopefully help out the heroes before finally spotting Mr. Cowboy in a bad tie-dyed black cloak. He made the swap without unpausing, and then after that he made his way to a villain who looked like they were made of giant green crystals, and looked at his reflection. Now the mirror might have a green tint to it, but he thought he looked really good now that he only had 3 colors in his costume. As he walked out, he tied up a few more villains, or if he couldn't tie them up, he would hit them to disorient them, and then drag them over to a hero. He did have to unpause for about half a minute, so he could catch Snipe's reaction when he noticed the change and the update to his costume, and it was very worth it as he watched all the police get a chuckle, and even some of the villains stop fighting to laugh at the Emerald Bunny, which immediately led to them being defeated, so it was a win-win situation for everybody but Snipe. After that he paused time, so he could give the good news to Eraserhead. While the UA students may not have known why half the windows blew out, he knew for a fact that it was Present Mike laughing since he set up a lawn chair on the adjacent roof, so he could enjoy the free comedy he calls the Staff Lounge TV show. It may not have much sound besides Mike, but the visuals are great if you have some binoculars. And if Nizu saw the vigilante that's been causing chaos to his staff, sitting on the adjacent roof to UA with some binoculars, well then no one would know why certain hours of footage get saved into a folder and then are deleted everywhere else since he doesn't want the chaos to stop. Katsuki doesn't know what is happening, and it pisses him off. Ever since the sludge villain incident, Deku has been able to avoid him at every turn. The second the bell goes off, Deku is nowhere to be seen until lunchtime ends. When school is over, he is always the first walking through the gates, even though no one saw him stand up or even start packing. If he tries to follow him outside so they can talk, then he just disappears after taking a turn down an alleyway. The nerd is looking so far down on him that he won't even look in his direction, and Katsuki is tired of it, so he goes with the nuclear option to finally get his answers. Meaning on a peaceful Saturday, he knocked on a slightly run-down door and watched as Deku opened it with a smile, watched that smile fall apart, and then had the door slammed shut. "You shitty Deku, open this door right now." The scream was slightly muffled, but Izuku knew exactly who it was. So he slowly opened the door back up, and with a much meeker smile he said, "Hey Kaken, is something wrong? The last time you came to my house willingly was because... now that I actually think about it, did you ever come to my house willingly? Well, I guess there was that one time you dash. I don't need a reason to see your shittiest. No, let me dash." Kaken tried to push the door open, but Izuku stayed firm. "Actually, I was enjoying some home alone time. So if you want to talk now, instead of waiting for school, or wherever is the next time you get forced to be in my useless presence, then you might want to actually have a reason." Something akin to shock passed on Kaken's face before the anger returned, and he said, "I've been trying to track you down at school, but you keep avoiding me, Deku." Now it was Izuku's turn to be shocked. "Oh, really? I hadn't even noticed I started seeing you less after the whole notebook, swan dive, sludge villain thing." And while he was talking about how after that day he started having the fun he never got to experience when he was for Kaken, must have took the avoidance in a different direction if the slight flinch of pain was anything to go by. But he did feel a little bad for his ex-best friend turned slight bully, so he opened the door and started walking back to his room to turn off the game he was playing on his laptop to get ready for whatever conversation Kaken felt was important enough that he had to come over to his house. "Sorry, Dusty Boy 17, but it appears I've hit a unskippable cutscene." And with those words, he closed out of the game and put the laptop back on his desk. He tried to push the door open, but Deku successfully pushed back and kept it almost closed. "Actually, I was enjoying some home alone time. So if you want to talk now instead of waiting for school, or wherever is the next time you get forced to be in my useless presence, then you might want to actually have a reason." And while Katsuki was shocked at how easily Deku can talk down about himself, he quickly switched to anger at him, telling him to do what he has been doing for months. "I've been trying to track you down at school, but you keep avoiding me, Deku." Katsuki hated how needy that sounded, but if it gets this conversation rolling, then whatever. "Oh, really? I hadn't even noticed I started seeing you less after the whole notebook, swan dive sludge villain thing, and while it stung to admit that even he knew he went afar with the suicide baiting thing, to have it thrown back into his face so nonchalantly stung a lot more, especially since it was probably the reason for the whole avoidance altogether. And then without a word, Deku opens the door and just starts walking back to his room. The way he is acting is so different from the Deku he has known since before they even had quirks, and it was only pissing him off more. But he reluctantly entered the house and placed his shoes next to the black, red, and white metal platform boots. He then quickly took a double take at the sight of them since he couldn't find Deku's normal red and white shoes anywhere, meaning the boots must belong to him. But it was just another annoying change he hadn't noticed, so he closed the door and started his walk towards a shitty nerd's room that was probably still covered head to toe in All Might merch. Except it wasn't. In fact, besides the matching action figures they both got for their 4th birthday and a poster of the man in his prime room, was devoid of the #1 hero. Now that's not to say it was empty. The walls were covered in the merch of multiple heroes like Present Mike, Snipe, Ingenium, Ms. Joke, Hawks, and even a highly detailed drawing of a man in all black with a gray scarf twirling around them, but only 1% of it belonged to Deku's favorite hero, which was more confusing than anything else he has seen so far. Which is why he decided to start the conversation right there. Okay, what the F is wrong with you, Deku? He didn't mean it to come out so harsh, but it was already too late to take it back. So he just pushed through. You lost some of your annoying nerdiness, but you replaced it with this fakest confidence. Then you replaced the brand of shoes you've worn since you were 8 with platform boots. What did you need a higher stage to look down on everyone from? And now you aren't even an All Might fanatic? So I'll ask again, Deku, what the F is wrong with you? But Deku just sighed before looking him in the eyes and saying, I'm being realistic. He stood up from where he was sitting on the bed and grabbed a burnt and waterlogged notebook. Katsuki immediately knew what it was, but stayed quiet as Deku flipped through the pages before finally stopping on one that just had 2 words in huge text. He didn't get to see what those words were before he shut the notebook and placed it back on the shelf. He chuckled and said, oh, how ironic, before finally turning to face him. And once he knew Katsuki was listening, he said, you see, after I fished my notebook out of the koi pond, I found about a, let's just say, talent. Yeah, I discovered a new talent of mine and started to have a lot of fun with it. But while messing with it, I thought about my dream of wanting to become a hero and realized that this new talent could make my dream that much easier to achieve. And then one thing led to another, and I started examining what else I could develop for becoming a hero. So like I said, I was being realistic. A hero needs to be confident in their own decisions, so I started to try acting more confident. And let me tell you, at first it felt like trying to wear a very uncomfortable mask, but the longer I faked it, as you said, the more the mask grew more comfortable, until one day it wasn't a mask and I actually felt more confident. But don't worry, I'm still plenty nerdy, he said while pointing to a 14th notebook on his bookshelf. I just finally figured out how to silence the muttering. As for the boots, they have many purposes, and while one of them is that I feel more confident with the extra height, the actual main reason is that they are good combat boots. In fact, they are almost the exact same ones that Present Mike were, so once again, I was being realistic about my dream. He then extended his hands to point at the walls of his room. I removed All Might, because 1, people can grow and acquire new favorites, but 2, All Might is unrealistic for a quirkless kid. Sure, I can save lives with a smile like him, but a quirkless kid can't compete with a man who can break the sound barrier with just a single jump. But if you look at my walls now, we have a man with a powerful scream, but also good martial arts skills. A man with perfect aim and a gun. A man with engines in his arms, but also uses quirk-powered martial arts. A woman with a quirk that just makes it easier to fall into hysterical laughter, and yet she uses it so well with her fighting style that most of her battles barely last 5 minutes. A man who can fly, but his main melee weapon is something that any quirkless person could pick up. Swordsmanship. And finally, a man who can simply even a fight out, and yet he uses a support item, aka something any quirkless person could use to fight, and even win battles against people who aren't even affected by his quirk. He picked up the All Might action figure, and then said, which definitely fills me with more confidence for quirkless people than the man who solves all his problems with just his fist ever has in the past few months. He then looked back at Katsuki and said, so I truly haven't been trying to avoid you, I was just being realistic like everyone has been telling me. I'm just sorry that being realistic also means cutting out people who try to burn your dreams at every turn. He wiped away a tear before walking over to his closet and grabbing a few things and stuffing them into his yellow backpack. The F does that me dash, but he was interrupted, even if that person was your best friend that you admired for years. The guy you thought had everything. The guy you stuck around with even after he started insulting you and burning your things all, because you thought that this guy had a better chance of becoming a hero than you did in a million years. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like my dream of saving people with a smile is actually possible, actually realistic. He then zipped the backpack up and put it on before stiff-arming Katsuki out of the way of the door and saying, "And I plan to smash fate itself before I let that chance slip away. And I don't care anymore if it ruins your plans of being the only hero from Aldera. Or hell, even your plans to be number one. I'm sick and tired of letting my time waste away while making no progress." Katsuki tried to stop him from walking away, but he was the one stumbling over his words now. No wait, eyes a dash. But he was cut off by the last words he would hear from Izuku Midoriya until they met again in one. Just make sure you lock the door when you leave Bakugo. And then with a final door slam, he was left alone with only his racing thoughts to fill the silence of this empty home. The second the door was closed, Izuku paused time and changed clothes. After that, he tried to calm down by taking a walk right through all the worst parts of town in normal time. He almost got mugged 7 times, which is a surprising number with how high the sun is still in the sky, and he stopped 2 different store robberies. But after he almost sent a fist right into the face of the 8th mugger without even pausing time, he knew that this wasn't helping. So he hopped on a roof to look around. Okay, so if fighting crime isn't calming me down, then I need something more relaxing. He looked over to UA, but immediately looked away. I don't even want to think about hero schools right now. He then looked over to my tower, but decided against it. I'm definitely going to get back at him, but I'm going to need more supplies than I have access to right now to really show my pettiness. But just as he was about to start looking in the opposite direction, he caught sight of a very orange fire blazing into the heavens a few miles away from my tower. Man, that is a bright orange. Probably Endeavor, since most flames are more of a red to yellow, while his are basically pure orange. Oh. Izuku immediately stood up and started running towards the one hardware store around this area. I wonder how Endeavor would react to a redesign. He started to cackle and could already feel some of his stress leaving him. Shoto sits on his bed with his notebook open in front of him as he works on his homework. As usual, he's locked into a deadly battle with English. It's definitely his least favorite language, but the prodigal son of Endeavor needs to know it. So here he is trying to understand how Y and W can become vowels. But at least the day is peaceful. A rare occurrence in the Todoroki household. Well, it was peaceful until he heard the sound of something smacking into the backyard sliding glass door. A few seconds later, it was opened, and now he could hear a voice but couldn't make anything out. He calmly closed his notebook and stood up, and once he had opened the door, he could actually hear the voice. I mean, what right does he have to barge into my life just as it starts to turn around? He asked me to leave him alone ever since we were 5, but as the good friend I was trying to be, I stayed anyway. But after he burns my notebook and tells me to take a swan dive, he doesn't understand why I started removing myself. And while Shoto loves the free gossip he is gaining on the intruder, he needs to find out what this guy is here for. So he leaves his room and starts to walk towards the sounds of intense ranting. I was half tempted to just reveal the whole story. Right there, maybe he wouldn't feel so angry if he knew that I almost died. Got my dreams crushed by a hero, started contemplating the swan dive, thing only to have all my dreams reawakened by a quirk I never even knew I had. Yeah, I'd like to see you act so high and mighty after knowing that the reason I was avoiding you had nothing to do with looking down or looking up to him, but was mainly just wanting to enjoy something I never got to experience before. And wow, just wow. This might only be the second time someone has spilled the tea to Shoto, but damn was this way better than the first time. He finally made it to where the sounds are coming from, and wouldn't you know it, it was Father's bedroom. So he creeped up to the half-open door and looked in. And going through the closest was a young-looking man in a black and green cloak pulling out all of Endeavor's hero costumes and dumping them into 4 different buckets before starting to take the lid off of a few different colored bottles and walking back over to the buckets. And while Shoto was tempted to keep listening in on the intruder's one-sided conversation, he couldn't just let the man sabotage Endeavor and maybe kill him. So he quickly made ice spread across the floor and encased the man's lower half in ice. He screamed before locking eyes with Shoto, or well, he thinks they locked eyes since those goggles make it hard to tell. When he opened his mouth, Shoto was expecting shouts of anger or confusion, but what he got instead was a chuckle. "Aw man, I forgot to check the whole house." Then the man simply shattered the ice by teleporting next to him. How weird. How does a child born from Endeavor end up with an ice quirk? Are you, like, adopted? And while he was still on guard around the intruder, he did crack a minuscule smile as he said, "I wish that was the case, but we are definitely related." And the man just nodded like that made complete sense before teleporting back over to bottles of liquid and pulling the cap off once again. "Well, I hope you and your siblings are okay. I've read articles about how if two opposing quirks come into contact, it can either be very volatile or just cancel out to almost nothing. Thanks for the concern, but what you are dousing Endeavor's costumes with seems like the more prominent problem." The man just tilted his head in confusion before looking at the bottles in his hand, and then slowly back up to Shoto. "Oh right, I forgot to actually explain why I was here, because I got too interested in how your quirk works, but you barely said like 10 words about it." "Well, as far as you know, I used up 10 words, but that's besides the point. The reason why I'm here is to blow off steam." "Well, technically I'm stroking the fire, but it's blowing off steam for me." He then raised a bottle with a slightly white liquid but with a pink ring of tape on it. "This is lithium chloride mixed with some water. It's completely harmless, but it does have a funny effect on fire." The man then teleported and dumped a small amount of the liquid on the back of his left hand. "Go ahead, make a flame. How did you know I can make fire?" The intruder probably rolled his eyes before pointing to his hair. "At first I thought you only had ice, but after looking at your hair for a while I realized that it's natural and not dyed, meaning if your hair is naturally red and white there's probably a reason for the split, and it probably has to do with your quirk. Add that to the fact that ice only came out of your right foot, and it's not that hard to realize you have fire and ice. Now please just make a small flame, so I can prove I'm not trying to kill your dad and only make his life a little more bright." And while Shoto hates his left side, he is intrigued, so he makes a small flame. But it's not the ugly orange and red of Endeavor. No, it's a quite beautiful pink instead. See, completely harmless, but is going to look hilarious on the stern face of Mr. Burning 24/7. The man started to laugh again, even as he poured the entire pink bottle into a bucket with 2 costumes while Shoto was still distracted with the dancing pink flame on his hand. Now, I don't know if you were listening in, but basically someone was mad that I was avoiding them even though they hate it when I don't leave them alone either. And after he finally got me to talk, he tries to act like he's the victim. So I get mad, and then he gets mad, which only makes me more mad until I decide to storm out and cool off by doing something I enjoy. But I was too angry to enjoy that either, so I decided if I'm not going to be able to enjoy anything today, then I'll just set up something funny for me to enjoy when I wake up in the morning. He then uncapped a bottle with a green ring of tape and started to pour that one into the second bucket. And so after picking up some supplies from a Home Depot here, I am giving some flavor to all of the number 2 heroes costumes that will definitely be hitting the headlines for like a week. I can already see the headlines. Breaking news. Endeavor changes name from Hellflame Hero to the Painbow Hero. He laughed and wiped away a fake tear before he went to grab the blue bottle, but Shoto beat him to it, and after dumping a little bit on his left hand, he poured the rest into the third bucket. He lit a bright blue flame with some pink residue and said it will probably be something more along the lines of breaking news. Endeavor is trying to subtlety confess his feelings for All Might by fighting crime with colors of the pride flag. The young man stared slack-jawed watching the youngest Todoroki help a stranger prank his father, but eventually shook his head while laughing. "Oh man, this definitely helped me relax, but now I don't know if I'll be able to sleep until I see tomorrow's news articles." He finished pouring the purple bottle into the 4th bucket and sat on Endeavor's massive bed. Once Shoto had dipped one finger into each bucket, he too sat on and then watched as the green, blue, purple, and pink flames danced across his fingers. He was completely mesmerized by how simply changing the color made it look so beautiful, and as if it never belonged to Endeavor in the first place. He was interrupted by a hand starting to shake his right hand, which brought him back to reality, meaning he quickly extinguished the fire. "The name is Ghost. Your friendly neighborhood, city? Or would country be better? It doesn't matter. All you need to know is that I'm a vigilante that travels to a lot of different places in Japan, and I sometimes prank heroes out of boredom, or as you can see here, to relax and have fun." Shoto contemplated not returning the introduction, but decided to, since this guy could have already tried to attack him a few times. "My name is Shoto Todoroki. My father despises vigilantes, but so far you haven't given me a reason to feel the same. Ghost tilted his head in confusion, and then started counting on his fingers. 1. Breaking of the quirk restriction laws. 2. Breaking into your house. 3. While it was short, we had a fight. I mean, the ice is still right there. 4. I'm planning to humiliate your dad by turning him into the personification of Toy Chica's sentient rainbow. Shoto nodded as he thought it over before saying, I see where you were coming from, and while I don't understand the reference you were making, I still feel like that last one actually makes up for the fact that the first 3 happened. This caused the vigilante to start to cackle, but once he calmed down, he said, while I am appalled that you've never seen the early 2000s hit classic Five Nights at Freddy's 1 through 58, this is still the greatest conversation I've had with someone my own age, and that's actually not that hard of an accomplishment when you consider the whole reason I'm here is because of a conversation with someone my own age. Still, I wouldn't say no to being able to have more conversations like this. Shoto agreed with that statement. But before he could take his phone out, it was already in the hands of the vigilante who was typing away. When he got it back, he had a new number with the name, just being the characters for green, or in other words, Midori. Shoto raised an eyebrow, but Ghost simply pulled his hood down to reveal his very curly and very green hair. I think the name fits perfectly. Shoto hummed in agreement, and then looked at the time. It seems like Ghost, or should he call him Midori now? Also check the time. Actually, now that I think about it, why are you home alone? I mean, I specifically chose Endeavor to prank because I knew he was on patrol right now, and therefore wouldn't be here. But what about you? Shoto simply stated my older sister is an after-school tutor. My older brother moved out to live closer to the medical school he goes to, and my mother is in a mental hospital for spilling boiling water on my face. Even with the mask and goggles, Shoto could feel the shock and confusion on their face. They eventually shook it off and said, while I appreciate the openness, I feel like I just learned something that belongs to like a level 3 friendship when we barely apply for level 1. Now it was Shoto's turn to tilt their head in confusion. Tragic backstories shouldn't be unlocked until a level 3 friendship. They once again stared in shock before saying, yeah, it's a good thing you didn't try to reveal anything else to me, or it might have taken over my brain until I was so focused on it that I ended up permanently harming my body just to help with your problems. Okay, now I'm really confused. They jumped off the bed and walked over to the buckets. So am I. But that's usually what happens in anime, and that stuff has to be at least a little accurate, right? Shoto also got off the bed to watch as Ghost carefully took all of the costumes out and patted them dry before hanging them back up. I don't know what anime is either, but I'll have to agree with your statement. No video games, no anime, they seem to glitch out a little bit before saying, and you were in there studying, so no fictional reading either. Careful there, Todoroki, or you might make me think you have a terrible dad. Actually, now that I think about it, why did your mother pour? No, wait. That's too much information. They teleported again, and only now did he notice that all the supplies were gone, and the closest didn't look out of place at all. Okay. The second this prank is no longer trending, I'm going to send you some things. And we're going to give you a hobby that has nothing to do with the development of your future. And then with a long extended bye, the vigilante was gone. As he walked through the house, there was no evidence that he was ever there in the first place. In fact, if his hand didn't shoot up in multicolored flames as he scrolled through his phone contacts, just to look at the prankster Vigilante's phone number, he might have really believed that it was just a ghost. When Enji got home, that night the house was devoid of noise. Shoto was in bed, already asleep, and ready for the next day. And while his daughter would have only arrived home shortly before him on a normal day, she decided to spend the night at her girlfriend's house instead. He still hadn't met this girlfriend, something about stopping a Bugs Bunny ripoff from getting grilled, but he trusted her enough to protect his daughter, so he was okay with it. And so, with a quiet house, he quickly got out of his costume and fell asleep. He never noticed the slight chemical smell his whole room had. And he still didn't notice it as he put on a fresh costume to start an early shift so he could spend the rest of the day checking up on Shoto's training. No, he only noticed it when he walked into his agency, and people started to laugh. Then and only then did he pay attention to the smell of his costume and really look at the color of the fire he keeps on at all times while in costume. And it was purple. He was immediately outraged, but that only made people laugh harder as his flames expanded and became an even deeper purple color. And now he either had to stick with it or run all the way back home to change. But only one of those options would waste a good amount of hero time. and seeing as how evil never sleeps, he can't stop fighting just because of a wardrobe malfunction. And so he stuck it out and used the purple flames to fight for the day. Except it wasn't just purple, and it wasn't for just one day. He chased down a woman who could fly by controlling lead, all while covered in hot pink flames. He defeated a man who could control shadows with neon green flames. And he took out an entire trigger-enhanced gang with bright blue flames. He didn't really mind that one no matter how much he tried to deny it. The next morning, two Todorokis woke up to an amusing notification. For Shoto, it was a text that simply read, "Midori, OMFG, look at yo boy go." I knew this prank would end up going viral. The painbow hero, Endeavor fecking called it. Is this Endeavor's way of coming out? Endeavor gets a colorful prank from the ghost of Japan. This is definitely the most amusing articles I've read about Endeavor. I'm famous. / / // How? How did you just do that? You don't know what a kamaji is? No. No, I do not. Oh, you sweet summer child. There are so many things I have to teach you. Whatever you say. But in a dim warehouse, a black-haired man peeled himself off the dirty couch he dragged in about a week ago, and after double-checking that none of his staples fell out, he pulled his phone out of his coat pocket and opened it up. He dragged his finger across the multiple cracks as he read his newest message. Forgot me not. The prankster ghost of Japan. What the hell is that? It barely took a minute for Jiren to reply. You told me to send you anything interesting about Endeavor. Yeah, but this is just about the newest vigilante with the most unoriginal name I've ever heard. Like who the hell calls themselves Ghost? Just read it, and I think you will be much more interested in this specific one. Dabi rolls his eyes but clicks on the link. It takes a minute for it to load because of the terrible internet here, but once it does, the first thing he is met with is a low-quality photo of a figure in a cloak with glowing yellow eyes. And all of it was on some news site he had never heard of, which basically means that this vigilante hasn't done anything big enough to be known worldwide. Like, sure, Endeavor got pranked, but only a few people have connected it to the teleporting ghost that likes to steal costume pieces from heroes. Wait a minute. Dabi scrolled back up to look at the image of that flaming trash bag covered in purple flames, obviously enraged at what was done to his outfit. He then scrolled further to see him shooting pink fireballs, and even further to watch him create a pillar of neon green flames to break out of a bubble of shadows. By this point, Dabi was chuckling even as some of his staples ripped from the wide grin he had. But he quickly went back to his mask of indifference as he looked at Endeavor covered in blue flames while taking out a gang. After that, he quickly scrolled past all the Endeavor stuff to get to the origin of this ghost. But that is only the most recent, pardon my pun, endeavor of this ghost. He is also known for chasing heroes. That's right, not being chased by heroes, but actually chasing heroes down just to mess with them, or in the case of present Mike Snipe and a currently unnamed underground hero, literally stealing parts of their costume just to add it to their own. It is currently unknown what their quirk is or what limits there are, but this vigilante has been known to appear randomly around all of Japan and stopping crimes within seconds before disappearing. And this way of acting is what got him the name Ghost in the first place. But it seems like Prankster might get added to their name if they keep up with messing with all the heroes they come across. Okay, I'm kind of interested in the vigilante if he can successfully do all of this without ever even being worried about getting caught. I knew you would, which is why I'm already trying to track the man down so you guys can talk business. Weirdo, he said before closing his phone and finally standing up. He did a little stretch and enjoyed the sensation that came with popping his back before finally stepping outside. But in a decent apartment on the other half of the city, a different black-haired man was slumping against his kitchen counter as he waited for his coffee to brew. Once it was done, he sighed and leaned back as if to ask God what he did to deserve this. But there was no answer, so he pinched his nose in annoyance and closed out of the article labeled Endeavor Gets a Sprinkling of Pretty, and then made his coffee exactly how he likes it before dumping the entire pot into his thermos and heading for his car to start the day. And finally, we see the POV of the culprit. For Izuku, he woke up with a billion different notifications since he set up a filter to catch keywords related to Ghost. And so, as he went through breakfast, he read article after article. Some of them made him laugh, while others made him feel embarrassed or confused. Ghost is like a kid-friendly version of Stain, only instead of culling bad heroes, he just pranks them into oblivion. I literally chose what heroes to prank at random, so definitely not like Stain. Oh well, the rumors will probably go away after I figure out exactly what I'm going to do to All Might as revenge. Theories on Ghost's quirk: eyesight-based teleportation, coordinate-based teleportation, FTL speed quirk, that would cause sound barrier breaking with every movement. Like that doesn't even make sense with the name Ghost. He scrolled through a few more articles and eventually sent his favorites to Todoroki, but after he sent them he thought about how he gained that friend and chuckled while cleaning his bowl. "What's got you so cheerful?" his mom asked while cleaning her own bowl of food. Izuku thought about how to word it before he said, "Well, there's this vigilante who loves to prank people." She raised an eyebrow, and he could already feel the stern talking coming, so he quickly backpedaled and said, "Not that I would endanger myself like that or anything, but you got to admit seeing Endeavor use pink fire was kind of funny, but completely harmless. Well, to Endeavor at least." His mom just shook her head in amusement. "I don't know what changed recently, but I'm glad you seem so much happier." She then poked him with her elbow, even if it did involve some drastic fashion changes. Izuku's face tinted red as he spluttered and tried to explain how he wasn't going through an emo phase, but really did just like the boots. "Whatever you say, honey. You know, I actually dyed my hair black once, and I remember trying to have this exact conversation with your grandmother." She then walked over to the closet and started looking around. "You know, I think I still have a picture of it, and maybe I can bring it back and we can be naughty mo's together." And this just caused Izuku to laugh harder. And man, did he need this day to just hang out with his mom. Her presence could just drain all his anxiety and let him truly relax and recover. He truly wouldn't know what he would do without her, he said mentally as he continued to laugh with her over how bad Mitsuki looked with dark purple hair back in high school. Thank you for joining us on this journey through What If Overpowered Deku Became a Prankster. We hope you found it as captivating as we did. A big thank you to Cooper Radio for creating such an engaging story. Don't forget to visit their profile on archive of our OWN.org for more fantastic works. The link is in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Zenin Fanfics for more intriguing explorations into fanfiction and fantasy. Your support helps us create more content like this, and we love hearing your thoughts and suggestions in the comment section. See you soon in the next video.